Hello, and welcome to the Leicester versus Spurs post-match analysis show. We're going to try and do this every week after every game, and we're trying to look into a lot of detail as to what happened in games. Lots of fan channels will give their immediate reaction. We, in fact, do that ourselves, and they'll tell you what they kind of thought about things, and that's great. But the idea of this show is to be quite a lot more in depth. So quite often when you're watching football on terrestrial TV, Sky, ITV, BT, these sort of channels, they won't really give you in-depth coverage about teams other than the big six, which is really, really sad in my opinion. I think, we as consumers of that product, which is the Premier League, deserve that analysis to understand what's going on with our team, to get those in-depth insights. So I'm going to try and provide that on this channel, sometimes with my guests. Today I'm doing it by myself. And please let me know what you think. And if you like this sort of content, please like, comment, let me know what you think in the comments below. One thing I'll also say before I start is that usually I would love to do this with like full HD video, show you the graphics, show the interchange, the patterns of play. Because this is on YouTube, I obviously can't do that. But if you look in the description below, I'm going to link you somewhere where you're going to be able to see some of that stuff. So if you're really interested, you can really see what I'm talking about. But in the meantime, I'm going to try and give you that analysis as best I can in a vocal fashion. So on today's show, this is how I'm going to phrase it. We're going to talk about the story of the game. So this is a game of two halves, which we'll get to in a moment. So we're going to look at the first half analysis. I'll be looking at the team lineups, the structure, how each team played. I'm also going to pick out a few key players, one of which was Facundo Buonanotte, a very impressive debut. I'm going to talk about playing it out versus kicking it long, and a little bit more about some of our key players as to why our performance did and didn't work in some aspects. Then we're going to talk about the second half because a lot changed in that second half. And I'll talk about what changed and what impacts it had. Then I'll give you some player ratings. And then I'm going to give you my overall thoughts on what I thought of the match in context. So without further ado, let's get underway. So Monday night, the return to the King Power. Fans hadn't been there for a long time. Not in fact since the Blackburn game that we lost at last season, at the end of last season, when I think all the players were hungover from winning the championship. And we were back. So here it was, and the score finished 1-1, which I think against a top 5 team from last season, you've got to say is a very good result. However, it's fair to say that this match really was a game of two halves. I love this meme, makes me laugh, and I think it adequately describes how we sort of played. We were pretty poor in that first half. I'll talk about why in just a second. The second half, though, was really, really promising. And I think, you know what, even if we'd have lost, that second half would have made fans excited. And the fact that we got a result plus that performance in the second half has got me feeling kind of giddy. So talking about why it was a game of two halves, here were the stats from that first half. And pretty grim reading. So Spurs basically dominated every single metric. They had way more of the ball, more expected goals, 10 shots to our 1. And I think the shot that we had is hard to even really say it was a shot. They had 5 on target, 1 big chance. They had 9 corners. We didn't get any. We basically posed no goal threat whatsoever. One thing I will say, though, that these stats kind of show is that Spurs did have a lot of the ball, but it wasn't like we were completely hanging on. Though I feel it's fair to say that Spurs could have been home and dry in that first half. It's not like it was an XG of 2 or 3 or something where, we just got away with it. They had a lot of the ball. They played some nice stuff, but did they really ask killer questions of us? I'll leave that for others to say. Second half, though, very different story. The possession was similar to the first half, but a big difference here is look at the kind of threat that we had. We had 0.98 expected goals compared to Spurs 0.6. We got more shots than them. We had 3 shots on target, 2 big chances, one of which, of course, went win. 1 big chance missed each. We actually got some corners this time around. So that was much more like it. I think when you're playing a team that finished that much higher than you last season, 16 places, if you equate the 2 divisions together, you're probably not going to have as much of the ball. But the fact that we actually managed to get back into it, cause a threat, and dare I say it, maybe even could have won the game at the end, was very encouraging. So let's talk about the first half. And as you can see from my face here, oh my goodness, I was not feeling too great. So let's start with the lineups. We started in a 4-2-3-1, and there were a few surprises. I think the biggest surprise actually is that Jamie Vardy started. Apparently he was nursing some kind of injury and we weren't expecting him to be back, maybe not until the next match, maybe the match after against Villa, but he declared himself fit. Thank God he did. And he started up front. That's our talisman. Great to see him there. Some more surprises. We signed Facundo Buonanotte on loan from Brighton. He's only 19, but we were expecting to play some part in this match, but he started from the off in the sort of number 10 stroke number 8 position, depending on how you want to call it. We'll talk about why that is in a moment. Big surprise though, Steffi Mavididi didn't feature, not from the start anyway. Bobby Reed took his place as the kind of left winger that cuts in to become a 10, and Mavididi had to make place on the bench. The double pivot was kind of expected. We went for Harry Winks and Wilfred Ndidi. And then at the back, maybe one surprise, Vestergaard did take his place. Okoli, who had played in a few of the preseason games, stepped to the bench. I think given his poor performance against Lons, that's maybe not so much of a surprise. No room for Ricardo Pereira, which makes me personally very sad. But James Justin's a very good player. And we had Victor Christensen playing for the first time since he left us on loan to go to Bologna last season. And as it turned out, overall, we had a pretty good game, if a little bit quiet in the first half. Now, the way that we play, what I want to point out here, you probably have noticed this already, but Steve Cooper's tactical system is a little bit different to how things were done in the past. He also uses this kind of 3-2-5 shape when we attack and a 4-4-2 when we defend. But when we attack, the way that he achieves that shape is very different. So the way that he does it is he uses Victor Christensen to bomb up on the wing and become essentially an auxiliary winger. This is quite similar to the way that Ipswich play with Leif Davis. And what you see in return is that the back three here, they shift along to kind of cover the distance, leaving Vestergaard in the middle as the primary builder. We still have the double pivot here, but rather than inverting the fullback, which is what we did last year. So last year, this player here, which would have been Ricardo, would step into Ndidi's position. We just have two people here at all times. Although Ndidi does push forwards to join the attack quite a lot, and we'll see some examples of that in the game. And then Bobby Reed, he nominally starts on the left wing, but when we're on the ball, he will shift in to become a kind of 10-8. And this gives us a shape that's very similar to last season. So if this was last season, this would be Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, this would be Ndidi, this would be Winks, and this would be Ricardo Pereira. And that would give you a box midfield of 4 here, and it'd give you a back 5. And that gives you 5 men in attack, 5 men in defense. And because most teams defend with a 4-4-2, 5 is more than 4. So it gives you 1 man advantage. And that's the idea of why it's very fashionable these days to have this kind of 5 shape up front and 5 shape at the back. Now, we were up against Spurs, and before we kind of look at their system, we already knew what they would kind of do because Ange Postecoglou is he's a plan A type of manager. But he's very impressive at implementing that plan A in just a season. So Spurs, they ranked number 1 for high turnovers last year in the Premier League. That's amazing. That's something that you'd expect Jurgen Klopp normally to be dominating. But there's more teams now that are more aggressive maybe than Liverpool. And I think Spurs are one of those teams. So they're going to be a sort of team that gets right in your face, try and be the protagonist, dominate the game and try and blow you away. That is sort of their game plan. And something that's very unique about the way that Spurs play is they also invert fullbacks, which is a very common trend these days, but they invert 2 fullbacks. As you can see, they invert their left and their right fullback, and they actually invert not into this defensive midfield position, which is what Maresca did with us last season with Ricardo, but they invert here into the number 8 positions, you could call them. And this actually gives them, if you can see here, a front 6. So I talked about the front 5. Well, Andrew's gone one step further and gone for a front 6. So on paper, that makes them even more aggressive and even more likely to be able to find superiorities and the one-man advantage and overloads. But it could also make them a bit weaker on transition. You can see here that they retain this kind of back 4 shape, which means that they're solid centrally. But you can see that there's going to be space in the wings here that could be taken advantage on the counter by another team. And we, in fact, did manage to do that in the second half. So, yep, that's how they kind of line up when they're in possession. And looking at their actual team lineups, not too many surprises. £60 million man Dominic Solanke made his debut up front. Rodrigo Bentancur played. This is something I got wrong in the pre-match preview. I said that Archie Gray would play here because Basuma was out, not suspended, but he was disciplined by the club. But I forgot that Bentancur had recovered from a long-term injury last season and was playing again. Sadly, he actually picked up another injury in this match, and I hope he's okay. But he played in this position, and he's a very good player, very experienced Uruguayan international that used to play for Juventus. Probably the biggest surprise from Spurs is that instead of playing Dejan Kulusevski, who's another ex-Juventus player, they went for Brennan Johnson, who is ex-Notts Forest and had, sadly, a very good display against us when Forest dismantled us in the cup when Cooper was in charge. So that was a bit of a change. He played on the right-hand side, but otherwise you got your usual suspects. The legendary Heung-min Son, James Maddison, the player that we know only too well at Leicester, Pepe Matisara is one of the holding mids, and then 2 fast back 2 of Mickey van der Ven and Christian Romero. So looking at the Spurs challenge, I talked about the inverted fullbacks, and here you can see that I've circled in red. This is very early on in the game, and there they are. They've already inverted this position. You can see, can't see the full shape, but the back 4 would be here. And we also see James Maddison, who's on the ball over here. And this is maybe one interesting thing. So Maddison in the Spurs team is given quite a lot of freedom to really drift around and link up and make the play. And he's so good at doing that. We obviously saw that a lot ourselves at Leicester, but here you can see him drifting all the way to the left. He would drift into the pockets, find a lot of space, and he was running the show. We've got to be honest. It was a great performance for him. Oh man, what we'd give to have him back in the team. And he got a good reception at the King Power, and he had a good game. I thought he was Spurs' best player actually overall. And that obviously causes a lot of problems in the game. So as we see here, Maddison's drifting into pockets, and this is probably not where you want to see him if you're part of the opposition fans. You can see we've got quite a structured defensive shape here, but Maddison, because he can drift and because Spurs play this system where they can find an extra man, it's going to give him time and space to find pockets like this. And actually their goal would come through this opportunity because he found space here. But we'll get to that in a moment. Right, the game kicks off, and I'm going to immediately talk about Facundo Buonanotte. The reason why is I think literally from 10 seconds into the game, he was already impressing me. And I've got to say, this was one of the most exciting debuts I've seen from a City player in a long, long time. And honestly, Brighton finished 11th last season and they sent this guy out on loan. How good must their first team players be? Because this guy was cooking. Right from the very off, I've circled him here. Well, I haven't circled him, but I'm going to point him out here. This is Buonanotte wearing a 40 shirt. And he was playing when we were defending in a 4-4-2 alongside Vardy as the player to press. So, you know, sometimes these sort of number 10 players can get a reputation for being talented, but a bit lazy. But Buonanotte was not lazy. He was pressing right up top. I was surprised by how good he was physically in terms of like being attritional and winning challenges and being able to ride challenges when getting knocked off the ball. I think he was less good in the air. That's maybe a side of his game he could work on. But otherwise, off the ball, I was very impressed. And we'll get to on the ball too, but that was even better, I felt. And yeah, here's a good example of it. So what's happened here is Harry Winks picked up the ball and he plays it into Buonanotte. Buonanotte had 2 or 3 players around him, but he manages to weave his way through, you know, a little hot shoe shuffle, and he manages to play a pass into Christensen here. And now, because we know the way that Spurs play, that actually gave us the opportunity to attack. So this is one of our rare forays forward in the first half, and Buonanotte was impressive. And I'm going to speak about him a bit more in the second half, but I just want to say that he sort of immediately grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck, I felt. And lots of us as fans were obviously very worried when Keane and Dewsbury Hall left. I'm not saying that Buonanotte is as good as that. Keane and Dewsbury Hall had such a significant contribution to us last season, but I was very excited to see what I did see. And I'm not surprised that Brighton didn't put an option to purchase in there, because this guy looks like a very good player indeed. Right, now I want to talk about one of my favourite goalkeepers, Mads Hermansen, and the kind of concept of kicking it long or playing it out from the back. So under Enzo Maresca, we were a team that were famous for playing it out from the back, sometimes even doing it when it was possibly the wrong option to do that. And it was interesting to see, would we take that approach into a Premier League game, especially when you're literally playing the team that is known for the highest turnovers in the league, right? If it goes wrong, oof, could be dodgy. So what did we do? Well, the answer is we actually had a balanced approach, I would say, but it was definitely noticeable in the first sort of 15 minutes that in general, I think we went long 9 times for every 1 time we tried to build from the back. And I'm not a dinosaur. I actually prefer to build from the back, but I will say that I think in the Premier League, you do have to be intelligent and understand the game state and realize sometimes it is still better to kick it long, even if what happens is we're going to talk about here, you get the ball turned over. And that's because I think the worst thing you want when you've got a kind of upset crowd because of what's happened over the summer is that, you know, imagine 3 minutes into the game, someone makes a mistake and Spurs have a tap in for 1-0. The floodgates could open, the crowd would be defeated, the team's morale would be on the floor. It wouldn't be a very good for our ability to get something out of the game. Kicking it long is going to cause you problems, but it means that, you know, you can be a bit safer and a bit more knowledgeable, knowing that, you know, you're going to be a bit more resolute. So that's what was happening, is Mads was kicking it long quite a lot. The problem is, though, is that when you kick it long all the time, most of the time it's going to be easy for the opposition to mop it up rather than for you to win it. You can do some things in your favour, like if you've got a lot of tall players in your team, but really, with the exception of Ndidi, do we really have someone who you'd say is like a physical colossus who's going to be able to win it? Vardy's not that type of player, right? Vardy is the GOAT, but, you know, if he's up against someone who's a foot taller than him, he ain't going to win the ball. So they were able to pick it up and sweep it up pretty easily. And this meant that Spurs were able to get hold of the ball very quickly and dominate possession. And because they managed to dominate possession, it meant that our compact defensive shape was tested very early on, and it was going to be tested quite a lot. So here we can see that we've got like a kind of 4-4-2 shape. The only difference here actually is that Justin has decided to come forward and chase Son, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But otherwise, you can see that this is a pretty good compact shape. Like if you're talking from the coaching manual, the idea of playing this way is you're trying to make it very difficult and congested for the opposition to play through. So here we can see that the distance between Yannick Vestergaard, he's easy to spot because of his size, and Buonanotte, the furthest man forward here, that's probably about 25 meters, 20 meters. And you can see it's well spaced. Maybe there's some space here, but that's because someone's pushing forward to press this man here. So overall, this is going to be tough for people to play through. Even if you're great on the ball, even if you're Man City, even if you're Arsenal, you're going to have to unpick the lock. And, if you think about last season in the Championship, we were the team that dominated possession. And many teams did manage to get points or even beat us just by having a very compact 4-4-2 block and making life difficult for ourselves, for us. So this time round, we're going to be the team that's not going to have as much possession. And we had to play a compact block quite a lot of the time. I want to talk about James Justin quickly. He was probably brought in the team specifically to deal with Heung-min Son, although I think he will keep his place going forward also. And he did a great job. Like even in the first half, Son did have a few moments, but Justin, he has done this several times against Son. He, I think, has got his number, and he chased him down, made sure he reduced his impact. And Son, he may not quite be in his prime like he was a few years ago, but he's still on his day a top player, one of the best players Spurs have signed probably in the last 10 years. So Justin, well done. Great job. Talking more about the compact defense, here you can see again, and you can see again, we've got kind of 4-4-2 shape. So yeah, this one's really easy to see. Here's your back four, here's your middle four, here's your front two. Very compact, not much distance to play around through. You've got to have to play from side to side to try and shift play along or try and find a free player. And here you can see the distance between back to front is probably even smaller. That might be like 18 meters. So this is quite impressive. It might not look that impressive on paper, but this is still showing defensive solidarity, a well-drilled and cohesive unit, and one that's going to be hard to play through. And I think that is important because Sheffield United, who went down rock bottom last season, conceded 104 goals. You're going to have a much better defense than that to stay up in the Premier League, especially this season where teams are going crazy again with their spending. Right, let's move on to Wilfred Ndidi. Wanted to pick him out because he had, I think, a good game overall, but I think there were things he did that were both positive and negative. Not always his fault. So firstly, Ndidi, what he gives you is physicality and good defensive work. So early on in the game, Spurs try and hit a corner to the back post. Here you can see his leap. Look how far up, high off the ground he is compared to everyone else. Dominates the ball, heads it clear, great defensive clearance. And that's something that he brings to the team. So, we could have played Ricardo Pereira instead of Ndidi in this position, but I can sort of see why Steve Cooper's opted for him maybe in the Premier League because that physicality is important. Even better than that, just a few minutes later, Spurs put another dangerous corner in. I'm not quite sure if this is going in or not, but can't see this here. But this is the boot of Ndidi, and Ndidi pulls up a fantastic clearance to stop it or stop a Spurs player from getting it and keeping the score at 0-0. So that's twice already that he's really proved to be good defensively. And, I have to say that overall, we conceded, I think, 14 corners to Spurs in total of the game, but they didn't score once from a corner. And that has been an absolute Achilles heel for Leicester over the last few seasons. We've just hired a new set pieces coach, so I think he's already starting to show that he's doing all right. And I think that overall, even though Spurs had a lot of corners, we never really looked like we were, that Spurs were unlucky not to score from once. We did a very good job on that. And Wilfred Ndidi, again, proving why he's, was one of the top, central defensive midfielders in the Premier League for a long time. Now, the problem with Ndidi is that when he gets on the ball, I think he's okay. I think it's sometimes underrated how good he is on the ball. He's not as bad as people think he is, but he's not as technical as, a number 8 or a number 10, like, Buonanotte, Keane and Dewsbury Hall. And so what that means is that teams are targeting him. And this has happened throughout his career at Leicester. This is actually one of the reasons why Brendan Rodgers kind of brought Yuri Tielemans back to help him as well. And what's happened here is that they're using as a pressing trigger. What's happened is Winks played the ball to Ndidi, and as soon as he got it, you can see that around him, he's got 2 men that are snapping, but even there's a man in front of him blocking the passing lane, and there's even a man behind him. So he can't even do like a back heel or try and play it backwards. So when you're in this position, to be honest with you, even if you're a top class player, it's quite hard to get out of it. What I will say is this is perhaps the argument of why you might put Ricardo in. Enzo Maresca last season used to say that Ricardo was really good at playing out of traffic. So in this situation, he might be able to shimmy one way or another, or he might be able to like spot the danger or sense it faster and play the ball left or right just to keep the ball moving. The reason why this is important is because what happened here is Spurs did win the ball back and they managed to launch an attack off it. They didn't score, but it was a threatening opportunity for them. Whereas if Wolf could have got the ball away, well, actually, you could see that we could have taken maybe 4 or 5 of their players out of the game and generate a superiority ourselves. So this is what the Premier League is really all about these days, these kind of transitional moments. And it can often define if you either start or concede an attack, which obviously means either scoring or conceding a goal. So I think that's something we've got to watch out for. And we have just signed Oliver Skipp. And I do wonder if that is the reason why Skipp has been signed, in that Skipp is probably more physical than Ricardo, but better on the ball than Ndidi. So maybe he could play here. And then maybe we'd revert Ndidi to playing high upfield in one of the 8 positions like he did last season. And I did just say that Ndidi's not that good as being an 8 in terms of on the ball, but there's another sort of thing that he can fulfill as an attacking 8, which was key in the second half, I have to say, to us getting back in the game. So something to keep an eye out. I don't know if that will or won't be the case, but I think we will try it. Right. Now I want to talk about Yannick Vestergaard. So as I mentioned, there was some sort of, question mark as to would he be in the lineup or would we play Okoli? The thinking is that Yannick Vestergaard is a slow player, even though he's good on the ball. And so we might get caught out. Well, I have to say that I think Yannick had a really good game. I don't think he got caught out for pace. And I think, to be fair, that's because we had Victor Christensen and James Justin out there to help him out. Fass is also reasonably fast. But what I really want to give him his flowers for, Yannick, is that he showed again why he's so good on the ball. So unfortunately, I can't show you the full sequence here. But what happened is Yannick received the ball from, I think it was Fass, and he's done a really clever turn, and he's managed to play the ball beautifully through the lines here to Ndidi. And what's really good there is he's, attracted 2 players here, plus another player here. So that's 3 players out of the game. He's played it into Ndidi. Now, he said that Ndidi isn't the best on the ball when he's hunted in packs and chased down. But in this move, now Ndidi has got time to turn and there's no one on him. And now he can drive forwards. So Yannick is helping out his mate here by being good on the ball and being patient and not just playing a first-time pass, but actually waiting, provoking the press and then playing out. So I think Yannick had a really good game. And this was exciting because I think if he didn't get exposed in a game like this, I think it shows you that he can play in the Premier League in this system. I don't think he could play in other systems, but in this particular system that we're playing, he can be powerful, and he was key to us. He actually just got into the Championship Team of the Year. They announced it today for some odd reason, but he was voted along with Keane and Dewsbury Hall, and he deserved it, in my opinion. Right, now I want to talk about the left-hand side of the pitch. So reason I want to bring this up is this is completely transformed to last season because neither of these players were playing for us last season. I mean, technically Christensen was contracted, but he was on loan in Italy. So we signed Bobby Reid in the summer, and Victor Christensen is back. And these two are trying to combine and make things happen. To start with, I think it's still early days would be the polite way of saying it. But as the game progressed, they actually started doing quite well. And there could be a promising opportunity. I think of the two, Victor Christensen was the one that certainly caught my eye. Bobby Reid, I think he was a bit under par in my opinion, given what I've seen him do for Fulham. But here you can see combining. Richard Christensen's got the ball and he's just played the ball down here into the sort of inside channel, and Bobby Reid has run from deep here and he's going to run in here. So we did this kind of move quite a few times last season where the number 8 would try and run into this sort of deep position, and then they would try a kind of dinked cross into the other attacking midfielder to try and get a header in or a cutback. This is a very common move that we tried and it led to many, many goals, and we're trying to replicate that move but in a slightly different way. And the different way being that if this was last season, this player on the wing would be Mavididi, and this player in the middle here would be Keane and Dewsbury Hall. So as I say, the way that we're trying to achieve it this time round is with a left back that's pushing up and with a 10 that's drifted inside. And that's quite an interesting question. Like, what is better out of those two approaches? And it's really hard to say. I think it's just one of those, like, what flavor do you like? Do you like Indian food or do you like Chinese food? I like both foods, to be honest with you. I like my food. But, there isn't really a winning answer there. What I would say is that maybe by having the left back, it means that you're going to be a little bit less exposed on transition down that side, and it might make you a bit stronger defensively. But conversely, when you're trying to press, because that player is probably going to be drifting back more than forward, it means that you're going to be pressing with fewer players. And I'll be able to show you that in the second half. But this season, rather than pressing with 5 men forward, we tend to press with 4. and that can make your press less efficient. You can get around that if you know what you're doing in terms of a coaching perspective. But for example, when we played Lons pre-season, it really stuck out that we were only pressing with 4, and to be honest with you, it just resulted in Lons having the ball too often, having too much space and be able to play through it and kind of taking 4 men out of the game without doing anything. But Cooper worked on that and it was pretty effective. Well, more in the second half, first half, not so much. Right, now I want to talk about sort of chances that were generated. So Spurs had a lot of the ball and they were making some chances and some half chances. Here was one of the chances that I thought there was a really good chance. Ball gets crossed in here to Solanke. Solanke's got a free header. The pace on the ball is not the best. So I think to score from this is still going to be difficult because you got to really rip your neck muscles to generate the power. And in the end, it was a fairly tame header. But it was a warning sign, right? If someone's just signed a £60 million strike, you probably don't want to give them 3 headers in the box. And fair play to him, he's managed to peel off those defenders to go 1-on-1 against Justin. So that was something to watch out for. And then unfortunately, it was coming. Pedro Porro then scores for Spurs. What happened in this move is the ball got played out to Maddison. I mentioned him picking out the pockets. Maddison plays a really great cross into here, and Pedro Porro, who starts in this position in A, does a running cross, beats his man, which is Bobby Reed, and manages to head it in for 1-0 to Spurs. And you can see here that here's Bobby Reed. You can see he's actually pretty close to Pedro Porro, but I think he could have done a bit better here. Maybe try and be a bit more physical, give him a bit more of a nudge. Fair play to Bobby Reed. At least he chased the man. It wasn't like he completely got ghosted by it, but it felt like a bit of an easy goal to concede. And I think something that disappointed me is that I think overall for the first half, right, we'll come to this here, in fact. So look, in the first half, I was feeling a bit disillusioned. But if we look at the expected goals for Spurs, as I mentioned at the top of the show, even though they had a lot of possession, even though they had so many shots, and quite a few on target, they only made that one big chance, which is the goal that they scored. The other ones weren't so good. So I kind of felt that although we were offering no threat really at all, defensively we were quite compact and we were fairly pragmatic, and that kept us in the game. A mistake that some teams have made, especially promoted teams in the past, I remember Norwich doing this against Liverpool, is they try and attack them early and they just end up getting wasted like 5 or 6-1. Being pragmatic is not my favorite type of football, but, it's a results-orientated business, right? And I think being in it to win it is something that is applicable here. So I think we overall did a good job. But the reason I've got my sort of face palm here is I just thought this is the game that I predicted, though. What's going to happen is that we're going to huff and puff, but we're just never going to lay a glove on this team. And, we're going to probably start pushing a bit more forward, make a few more attacking substitutions, and then that XG for Spurs is going to go through the roof because we're going to put more space at the back. Probably Vestergaard's going to get caught out for pace because he's got to push up, and it is going to end up being 3-0. Maybe not quite a 5-0 that Luke on the channel suggested, but I can understand why he thought that. He said the same thing. He said he thought the floodgates would open, would be good up until it was 0-0. So until it was 1-0, and then we would kind of capitulate. And it was feeling a little bit like, we know what's going to happen. But that is not what happened. Thanks to the GOATs, and thanks to some other players too. So how about the second half analysis? Right, so what changed? I want to pick this out. Steve Cooper said this post-match, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for this. He said, at half-time, we showed some images of how we could get the press better, be more aggressive, and play with more intent on the ball, because that was something that was lacking in the first half. We just seemed a bit scared. We didn't want to take on the man. We didn't want to go for the forward pass. It was just safe, safe, safe. Or to be fair to Spurs, they just didn't let us get going, and they just knocked us off the ball and won the ball back. The out of possession play resulted in better in possession play, and we did well for the goal. And not just for the goal, but going forwards too. So that's good to see, because I did wonder, actually, when I was watching the game live, if he deliberately told the team not to press as much in the first half and conserve their energy for the second half. But I think what he's hinting at here is that wasn't the instruction, and maybe we were just a bit timid to begin with, and he had to sort of, throw the teacups at the team a little bit and show them what they were doing wrong. But fair play, because this tactical instruction worked. He didn't make any subs to begin with in the second half, but we came out looking like a very different team. So what's changed? So now when we're looking at pressing, we're doing the pressing. And before I showed you an image of Buonanotte pressing, but pretty much by himself. But now we can see that here, Spurs, I think this is Bentancur on the ball. You've got Ndidi up against him. We've got Vardy blocking one of the passing lanes, and we've got Buonanotte blocking one of the passing lanes back. And we can also see that this passing lane out to I think this is going to be Sarr, is also being blocked. So now it's a totally different ball game, because now it's going to be quite difficult for Spurs to just be able to have the ball and do whatever they want with it. And in fact, what happened from this press is the move kind of continues onto the side. And now we've got Fatau here in the 7, and I think Justin's pushed up as well, and we've won the ball back. Yeah, so Justin's pushed right up. He's managed to win the ball off. You can see again, look at the press, it's really good. We've got Winks, we've got Fatawu, we've got Ndidi, we've got Buonanotte up here, we've got Vestergaard here to be safe, and we've crowded this player out and we managed to rob the ball back. And that means that now we've got an opportunity. And what's happened is after Justin's picked up the ball, he can play a ball down the wing here. We know that the way Spurs play, there's going to be space there. You don't even really need to think about it. And he can play the first time ball here into Buonanotte. So Buonanotte's done really well. He's drifted to that side, real team player, and he's put in a nice cross here to Jamie Vardy. Now, Jamie Vardy actually here, he can't quite control it. It kind of gets knocked a bit back behind. So this isn't the goal directly. But what I really like now is that it wasn't just the first phase of attack that we were pressing. What happens now is that Christensen, who's bombed up from left back, and indeed he's come push forward, and they've crowded out this Spurs player. They want that second ball. They want to be physical. We're going to bully you, Spurs. You can't just push us around and do whatever you want. This is the king power, and we want something from the game. So really good work from both of them. Indeed and Christensen combining, again, showing you the power of pressing together as a unit. And indeed, he manages to play the ball to Christensen, who drifts down the wing. And Christensen puts a really nice low cross into the box and this sort of thing. And this is something that I really like. I think last season when we played under Enzo Maresca, too often we were guilty of trying to score the perfect goal rather than maybe having a gamble. So Christensen's putting this ball in and he's hoping that someone's going to run onto it. But there's still obviously the chance that no one's going to get onto it and we might actually give away possession. But the thing is that, like, you know, if you don't ask, you don't get. So you've got to try it. And I like the fact that we are instructed to do this. I think the fans are going to really like it too. Now, as it happened, the ball didn't get to any men. But because we're attacking, we've got now 4 here. We've actually got the 5th, of course, who's going to be Fatawu, the other winger on the other side. Fatawu manages to pick up the pieces. And now because he's got the ball, he can do a little bit of skill and he goes for the cross. And uh-oh, Spurs, what's this? Are you giving a certain goat a little bit of free room? Well, they did. So Fatawu manages to pick out Vardy beautifully and Bosch. Vardy, look at the space he's got. Easy net. And it's 1-1. And, you know, funnily enough, that was our first real opportunity on goal in the entire half, entire match even, and we scored it. And it's funny how football can be that way, but it all came from the press. That's what I want to say. So it was much better, much more physicality, being aggressive, being a bit more direct, and we got our rewards from it. Right, after that happened, the game totally changed on its head. All of a sudden, you felt the crowd come alive. You could see the body language of the players. They felt we've ridden the storm, and now it's our turn to attack. And in fact, what I found interesting is that not only did our body language change, but so did Spurs. And their players, I could see they were like, oh no, you know, we should have had this game wrapped up by now. And now it's basically back to even Stevens. We got to put all that hard work in again. And they kind of looked like they didn't want to do that work. Whereas Leicester were like, oh my God, we could win this. We could win this, lads. Let's go for it. And so we did. So what was starting to happen is that some of the players who weren't so good in the first half all of a sudden caught a bit of fire and started to do things. So here's Bobby Reed. He picks up the ball here and he goes for a cross inside. Nothing really came of the move, but it was good to see him getting more involved in the game, combining with Christensen, combining with some of the other players and being just more involved as a team player. Then we go to Christensen. So as I said, Christensen overall impressed me in this game. I think in the first half, he was a bit quiet. I think in the first half, the move often broke down with him and Reed. But in the second half, he must have had some of Jamie Vardy's Red Bull because he was on it. And here you can see that he picks up the ball here. You can see the way that he's shaped his foot. And he puts a really great cross in here to Vardy. Vardy actually managed to receive it on the chest. And I think he was caught in two minds as if he should sort of either header it or chest it and then go for the volley. And in the end here, I think it's Romero manages to get the ball and knock it out for a corner. But I was really impressed. I mean, look at where he's standing here. This is almost Beckham-esque left-hand side cross. And he got it on target. And again, it's my point about being direct. Which I think the Leicester fans want to see. Like, they're, you know, don't get me wrong, you can be a bit, you know, get forward and just pump it long and just keep giving the ball away, like I showed in the first half when we were doing that from goal kicks. But at the same time, you know, football is about individual battles sometimes as well. And, you know, going for direct play at the right time can often net you a goal. So now we were being more direct without having to play perfect football, and it was working. And I could see we were starting to rattle Spurs, and Christensen really deserves a lot of credit. Prior to this game, I was calling for him to not be in the team because I felt that from an attacking perspective, he just wasn't doing it. And I think we did some pre-match analysis of the Augsburg match in a friendly where he just kept cutting back in, and he never tried to beat his man or go for crosses. The difference is that in this game, he was going for those crosses. He was trying to be productive. And, you don't have to dribble past 3 players. I actually like what he's done here, that by going for the cross even this deep, if you're capable of doing it, you don't have to beat 2 or 3 men, right? It's about trying to create end product by getting the ball into the box and finding your man. And if you can do that here from the byline, from a sort of more central position, it really doesn't matter. It's just that end product. So very impressed by the young Dane. Right. So we 1-1. And then we had something that I think is really going to get everyone excited. And unfortunately, because this is on YouTube, I cannot show you the glorious video movement. Again, if you go to the description or you follow us on Twitter, you'll be able to see it. But this was maybe what Cooper Ball is going to look like. And if it is, sign me up, because this was hot. So Mads gets the ball, playing it out from the back, and he plays it along the ground to Harry Winks. We've seen that before, but now we're building from the back. We're not just kicking it long. Winks and Ndidi combine with a bounce pass, and it allows Winks now to play a really nice ball through the channels to Bobby Reed, who's drifted in deep. The move continues. Actually, it went out a bit wide before coming back in. It came back to Winks, and Winks plays it back to Wout Faes. Now Wout Faes has the ball, and he goes for this really great ball through the lines to pick out Buonanotte, who's dropped deep. Buonanotte then plays the ball into Harry Winks again. And Harry Winks, you can see what he's looking for. And you can see the move that we're trying to do here. He's going to slot the ball through here. This is the Bobby Reed running through. So what I'm really loving about this is very Enzo Maresca-like, where players are making these intelligent movements to drag players with them to create space. So what we're seeing here is because Buonanotte is dropping in deep with this bounce pass, he's attracted 2 men to him. Now Bobby Reed knows that he can go and move into this position because this space has been vacated because this player has jumped to try and follow Buonanotte. And because we've practiced and rehearsed this attacking pattern of play many times, Winks knows that as soon as he gets the ball, he doesn't need to take a touch. He knows where to play it because the man is going to be there. And that's kind of the key of attacking patterns of play. So Winks does play the ball into Reed, and then Reed does another little bounce pass to Buonanotte, a little deft back heel, really nice to see. And Buonanotte slides a brilliant ball here through to Vardy. And this whole move, why it's so sexy, is he's now managed to isolate our best player, but our best striker, Jamie Vardy, one-on-one with the keeper in a slick move that probably took 8 seconds from start to finish. And the only sad news is that Vardy didn't finish. He literally kicked the stanchion afterwards. I'm a bit disappointed here because if you look at the angle was there to roll it in here, and he's gone a bit too centrally. And I think Vicario got away with one there, but that was unlucky. But look, even though it didn't go in, that was a glorious move. I really want you to look at that again. And what I like about it is that was the best of Leicester City last season. And I was concerned that a new manager or coach coming in would take away all of that good work. But it was still here, and we did it with new players who are just getting used to playing with one another. And we did this against a team that finished 5th in the league last season and have an expensive team, including taking one of our best players, James Maddison, from a few seasons ago. So if we can do that right now in the first official game that Steve Cooper's taken in charge, I want to give him a lot more credit than I did pre-match. That was exciting to see. And if that's the recipe going forward, could be in for some good news. Right. After that, it really looked like Leicester were in the ascendancy. And I don't know if we were going to win it, but I felt if one team was going to win it, it was going to be likely to be us. But sadly, what happened is that this happened is one of the corners. Bentancur and Fatawu clashed heads, and Bentancur receives a nasty cut here. And he ended up going down, I think, for something like 8 or 9 minutes, added a ton to injury time before getting subbed off. And at the same time, Ange then changed 4 substitutes at once. I think he recognized that they were second to every ball at that point and he needed to refresh the team. But what ended up happening is that I wouldn't say the game petered out, but we certainly lost our momentum. And that's a bit sad because I felt that otherwise we were in a prime position to grab another one. Just one thing though, before I kind of wrap up, you have to talk about the GOAT, this iconic moment. It was hilarious seeing this on social media. Everyone was upvoting it. Basically, as he was getting subbed off, Jamie Vardy looked at the Spurs fans and he said, "I've got one of these. How many of those have you got?" And everyone was laughing. And one thing that I laughed is even opposition fans, in fact, even some of the Spurs fans, even though they hate Jamie Vardy, they respect him in the way that they've been obviously, your wife is the grass and all that all throughout the game, but he'll give it back to them. And Jamie Vardy is such a throwback. You really don't have characters like this anymore. And there's been so many articles even saying that like the Premier League needed Jamie Vardy to return. And, you know, for us, obviously, he's brought us so much joy over the years, even his facial expression. I mean, just what a legend. What an absolute legend of the game. Will there be someone like him again? It's unlikely, but, you know, there was Ian right before Vardy. I'd love to see another one like that in the future. So lucky to have him. And he had a really good display. Just a shame he didn't get his 2 goals. Right. So I could talk a bit more about some of the subs and stuff that we made, but I think the overall story of the game has been told at this point. So coming back then, a game of 2 halves, as I said, and we look at that second half, way more XG than we had in the first half. We were actually a threat. We could have scored 2. Spurs still did have a good chance, I have to say, just prior to us scoring, but other than that, you know, despite having the possession, they weren't really doing that much of it. And Ange looked quite distraught afterwards because I think he knew that it was 2 points that let go. Happy face of nil here, you can see, because having seen that second half, I was enthusiastic. In fact, I think with about 5 minutes to go, I even said to my friend, I said, you know what, even if we happen to lose this match, I am still feeling way more excited than I did pre-season. Pre-season was really, really bad. And the reason why it was bad is not the results. The results actually don't matter. It was the performances. Is I didn't see those patterns of play. And we had these beautiful patterns of play that we played all season last year in the championship, and they were gone. And that made me just so unhappy. So seeing some of those moves come back, and, you know, that was the best move, the one that I showed, but there were other moves like that that showed similar aspects of it. Just the sequence didn't go on for so long. Yeah, it just made me really encouraged. And actually, I'd say that the moves under Cooper, I actually mentioned this pre-season, but they do seem to be a bit faster in a vertical transition, which is something that I think is really going to appeal to the Leicester fans, because last season, you know, it was quite slow-paced football for a lot of it. I mean, I want to defend Enzo and say that, like, when you're playing against a completely defensive block of a 4-4-2 that have no intent of attacking, it's tough, right? And it's not as easy as just pumping the ball in over and over again. But I do feel at times that Enzo could have adjusted a little bit to be a bit more direct. And I think we're going to get a bit of that this season. Yep, so talking about the stats of the game overall, one interesting thing here, thank you, LCFC data. Leicester City made the most clearances and most tackles in game week 1 of the Premier League. Clearances suggest that we were holding on, but I think the tackles is a little bit misleading, because I think that shows you that we were effective in the press, especially in that second half. You can also see that, you know, in terms of XG, despite the fact that the game, you know, Spurs had so much more possession, that it was 1-1. You can also see that, you know, despite having less possession, we gave a good account of ourselves. And I think so overall, I think some Spurs fans would say, oh, we got robbed, we should have run away with that 3-0 or something like that. But I think we could equally say that on that second half, we could have actually won the game 2-1. And therefore, I would say that overall, probably 1-1 is a fair result. Right, coming on to the match ratings. So these aren't my personal match ratings. I want to just make that clear. These are taken from SofaScore. But the reason I like to use the SofaScore match ratings is because this is kind of done through a sort of formula and looking at stats in the game. So there'll be things like, you know, how many passes did you make? How many of those were successful? How many tackles did you make? How many times did you get beaten to the ball? How many times did you win the ball back? And that means that it's more of an objective rating rather than someone's opinion. It isn't always right. They don't always tell the full story. You know, statistics can be misleading. But I personally think that overall, they are quite accurate. And I think that these stats prove this, because you can see that, for example, Bobby Reid was our worst ranked player. And I think if you watch the game, that was probably right. The move broke down with him too often. It shows you as Fatawu being our best ranked player. Maybe that's a bit generous, but he was good. And I didn't really talk about it, but, you know, we wanted to know, could Fatawu make the step up to the Premier League? But he had his fullback Udogie and Van de Ven at times on toast, and that was encouraging to see, because we need a strong season from Fatawu to stay up. You can also see that Mads played pretty well, and in general, most of the team had a good game, I think. Wilfred Ndidi was 7.5, so like I say, he might have lost the ball a few times, but defensively very strong. You can also see that James Maddison had the highest rating for Spurs, and in my opinion, he was the man of the match overall. But yeah, pretty good. And what does this mean? Well, I personally, looking at this, I would, you know, replace Bobby Reid for the next match, in my opinion. Mavididi could have played there instead. Probably the reason he didn't is that Mavididi came on for Vardy late on, and I think that was always a plan. Clearly, Cooper doesn't really trust Tom Cannon, which is a bit sad, but it is what it is. Cannon wasn't trusted too much by Enzo last year either. I think he's always considered one for the future. As I said, what does this mean for the next match? I could see Reid dropping out. And as I suggested, it wouldn't surprise me if Skip comes in and Ndidi actually pushes up instead. Maybe Buonanotte and Ndidi will swap positions. And the reason for that is, you know, just kind of rewinding a little bit, is when we saw the goal that we scored, it's looking at Ndidi here. So Ndidi, when he's pushing right up top like this, he's great at winning the ball up high, and that can spring the attack for us. So he is worth it in his team. And people will say, when Ndidi's not that good on the ball, he's not that creative. But you can be creative just by winning the ball back in modern football, and he's great at doing it. So that, for me, could be a reason why in the following game we might actually put him up high, especially against Fulham, who is a team who is still a very good team, but you would say aren't as good as Spurs, and it's probably more likely to be a bit more of an even game. We'll see. Right, speaking of the manager, well, look, me and Luke were absolutely panning Steve Cooper before this game. Luke was even saying, I think Cooper will have 5 games and then it might be time to sack him, which is like, talk about jumping the gun. But I sort of can see where he was coming from there. But I want to give credit where it's due. He noticed the match. He understood how to transform it. We got back into the game, and there were some really good signs in that second half. And I think it was impressive how he's got Buonanotte to play in his first debut for the club. And it's also quite impressive what he's done with Victor Christensen. I would like to see him get Ricardo Pereira into that team somehow. But look, I suppose it is a squad game. And for this match, I actually can understand playing James Justin against Heung-min Son. I think Justin will keep his place, but I just think Ricardo Pereira is, in my opinion, our most talented player overall. And I think you've got to find a place for him. But, you know, managers are paid to make these decisions, not me. Right, overall thoughts then. So I think that we were strong defensively and we had a well-organised compact block, and that was throughout the game. And what was good about that is meant we didn't get exposed to a pace. So even though we have Yannick, who's a very slow player, we never really got caught out there. We cope with set pieces really well, which I don't think I'd ever have the day that I would say that, but we did. You know, Spurs had so many corners, but they didn't score off one. That said, in the first half, we were way too timid. We didn't press aggressively enough. And also when we were on the ball, we weren't brave enough on the ball to try and make things happen. We struggled to play out and build in the first half, but at least we kept it in it. So I still think there was sort of something to be taken from that first half, even if it's clutching at straws. But yeah, Spurs, they could have been out of sight on another day if they were a bit more aggressive. And I actually think they were guilty of overplaying it, and they should have been a bit more direct themselves. Luckily, they weren't. Second half, though, that more aggression and intent transformed the game. That was amazing to see. Want to see more of that. We won the individual battles. That was good to see. I think the last time we got relegated, people weren't up for the fight. We need fighters, and we showed it. And we genuinely looked good, especially in transition. We kept the core of Enzo's ideas from last season, but more direct, which was good. And ultimately, I think we were unlucky not to have got a second, because Vardy should have buried that, and that would have been, well, an early contender for goal of the season, certainly as a team goal. So yeah, overall, I'm happy. I was kind of dreading this season, maybe the worst ever season to start a YouTube channel. But after seeing that, I'm actually excited, and I'm really looking forward to the Fulham match now. I'm not saying we'll win it. I'm not saying we'll even get a draw, but I think we'll compete. I think we'll show a good account of ourselves, and I think we've got a chance. And that, as a fan, is all you can ever ask for. So thank you so much for watching. Yeah, I don't know what you make of this show, but I'd love to hear your comments below. As I say, unfortunately, I had to show many screenshots here, but I'm going to leave a link in the description to this video, and there you're going to be able to go to a thread on Fox's Talk, which is one of the best Leicester forums. And on there, I'm going to have some pretty graphics, and you'll be able to see some of these beautiful moves in more detail. I'm also going to post some of that stuff on Twitter, which is at For Fox's Sake TV on Twitter if you want to follow me there, and there'll be other people on the channel too. So thank you so much for watching. Have a good one, and hopefully I'll see you again in the future. Goodbye.